Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Sir, can I share the screen or without the?
Yes, sir. I will make you as a host, then I can share it.
Yes, sir.
After you become okay. Okay.
Now I think so. It is done, sir.
You can make it the share, sir.
I hope I'm audible to everyone. Good evening. Um, this PPT I had prepared keeping in mind the UGC NET preparation, but since also the judicial exam aspirants are also there, let me give you certain first some tips and then we will start with it. Okay. If you have any doubt, please type in the chat so that I could take it up as and when required. So first thing to remember for any competitive exam, for that matter, wherever there is a multiple choice question, please remember the preparation which you would be doing is a bit different from what you would be preparing for a objective, subjective or a descriptive paper. In multiple choice question, remember that it is not that you should know the right answer. Knowing what are the wrong answers can also help you out. So what I have done for this deep presentation today is that I have listed out major case laws under each articles or provisions which we need to or must know under the preamble, and today I have taken only till article 21 because it will be too much on my part also to give too much data for processing. Now the PPT I will be sharing with sir, and sir can share it with you guys. So with this introduction, I thought I will start it now. For the net and one of judiciary also, constitution becomes a, just a minute, let me just disable it. Yes, constitution is a very important portion, and rather than me giving only the theory, I am giving you the essence of each of these provisions. Okay. um, just a minute. Yes. Now, the major parts which you have to, or an introduction to the constitution is required. Constitution of India was adopted on 26th November 1949, as we can see in the preamble, and it came into force completely on 26th January 1950. Provisions such as the citizenship, extension of the, it is only that the entire constitution, its entirety, came into existence or came into force on 26th November, 26th January 1950. Now remember, the Constitution of India requires, just give me 1 minute, please. Sorry. Now, the Constitution of India derives its legislative history or the historical origin from two previous legislations that were in force. That is the Government of India Act 1919 and Government of India Act 1935. Now remember, Government of India Act 1935 is something to which we are more similar to our constitution in terms of it having the, what do you say, in terms of it having the federal structure, the parliamentary form, concurrent list, the federal list, and the union state list, provincial list, and the federal list as it was known in the Government of India Act 1935. We are more similar to the Government of India Act 1935. But remember that when our Constituent Assembly was formed and the drafting committee had its sittings, it decided not to restrict itself to the British experience of constitution, but also to take the various systems or various principles that are embodied in other constitutions as well. We have taken separation of power from the US Constitution. We have taken Bill of Rights, that is the fundamental rights. The part 3 of our constitution is modeled in similar terms of Bill of Rights of United States. The directive principles of state policy, what should be the guiding principles? We have taken it from Ireland. The emergency provision, the third Ike constitution of the Germany, and also fundamental duties from the Japanese. There we have taken a partially from the Japanese constitution and the USSR constitution. So we have, what we have done is we have taken the best from different constitutions and tried to create a unique document which is very long, which is very comprehensive. If you see all the constitutions that came in 1950s, one of the most comprehensive document is the Indian Constitution. If you see even the Bhutanese constitution right now, it is similarly worded or structured to that of the Indian Constitution. So this was how Indian Constitution came into existence. Just a minute. Yes. Now, Constituent Assembly. Remember, the Constituent Assembly came into existence based on the August offer given by the Cabinet Mission. Now, in the August offer, which was a result of the Cabinet Mission, permitted India to create, remember the United India to create the Constituent Assembly with election. Now, when this election had happened, it was for the United India, which consisted of parts of Bangladesh and Pakistan. And during this election, there was limited franchisee, that is, qualifiers were being given, educational qualification, multiple requirements were there, based on which the August offer and the Cabinet Mission happened. And in total, 389 seats were there. Now, during the same time, we had the two-nation theory being
The seems is breaking, sir. What's breaking?
Am I audible or is there any issue?
What's breaking, sir?
Voice is breaking. Just give me 1 minute. I will just change the place where I. Is the voice better now?
Yes, audible, sir.
Okay, fine. From where was my voice breaking? So I can start from that side, right?
August offer, sir. From the
Okay,
beginning.
August offer. Okay, fine. Now, the Indian independence movement was going on, and we had, towards the Second World War, we had the option given by the British Parliament that if you assist the this one, right? Yes. If you assist the British force, we can consider a dominion status, but still the Indian National Congress asked for the Purna Swaraj, and subsequently things went ahead, and even in Britain they were for giving India independence. So what they told us, we cannot give independence just like that. There should be a working legal structure. And as part of it, the cabinet mission came and the August offer came, wherein we got a constituent assembly which was elected by the people, but only a limited number of people. And the constituent assembly contained 389 seats in total. But once the constituent assembly was elected, Jinnah's fraction moved forward with the two-nation theory, and we had India and Pakistan being created in the Indian Independence Act of 1947. Now remember, in 1947, when Indian independence was granted, there were three categories of territories. One was the territories that was under the British rule in India, which was given to India. Second was the British territories, which was under the British rule in the territory of Pakistan, which was given to the Pakistan. And the third category was those provinces or those princely states who had agreed to the British rule but had autonomous status. They used to pay tax to the Britain, enforce the British rule as and when required, etc. Now the same thing, those princely states were given independence also, and given the option to, they were given three options. One, to join India, two, to join Pakistan, and third, to remain independent. We had certain princely states, like the state of Hyderabad under the Nizam of Hyderabad, the state of Travancore under the Prime Minister of Travancore. The king was ready to join India, but his Prime Minister wanted to remain independent. We had certain other provinces, all the princely states also, who had independent aspirations, but finally different states, the princely states joined either India or Pakistan, and still now we are having an issue with one of those territories, that is Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan tells it was coerced induction, India tells it was free induction. There are a lot of controversies regarding that we are not going to take it up, but this was a sum essence of the Indian Independence Act. So with the Indian Independence Act, the election to the Constituent Assembly had to be restructured. So the Constituent Assembly was redrawn for those members who were only the part of Indian territory. Remember, that Constituent Assembly had 299 delegates. Now, one major question which comes in majority of the competitive exams, irrespective of whether it is civil service, judiciary, or net, is what was the duration of the Constituent Assembly? Remember, the Constituent Assembly sat for 114 days, which was spread across 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. Now, just a minute. Remember, on 9th December 1946, the Constituent Assembly had met for the first time. Now, 13th December 1946 is something which is very important for us to remember, because that was the day when the objective resolution was introduced by Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru had introduced this objective resolution to set out the objectives of the constitution which we were planning to draft. Now, remember that this same objective resolution was adopted as the preamble at the end of the proceedings. Now, the national flag was adopted on 22nd July 1947, and on 29th August 1947, the drafting committee was appointed with B.R. Ambedkar as the chairperson, Sir B.N. Rao as the advisor, and 6 other members who were part of the drafting committee. Now, this is the historical requirement of the Constitution. Now we are going to the preamble. Now remember, like I told you, the preamble is the modified version of the objective resolution, and it sets out all the objectives for the Constituent Assembly and also for our Constitution. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure all its citizens, justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all, fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of 1946, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. Now, when we see this preamble, we need to remember one thing, that is, this preamble is effectively divided into 3 categories. The first part tells what all are the objectives or characteristics, what all are the characteristics of our Constitution. That is, sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, republic. Also, it mentions what is the source or the ultimate sanction of our Constitution, or what can be termed as the Grundnorm. The Grundnorm of our Indian Constitution is we the people of India. Now, just 1 minute. Let me just. Now, when we see, it also helps us in understanding who made the Constitution, what is the source, ultimate sanction, nature of polity, goals, and objectives. So these 3 parts, when we see who made the Constitution, the Constituent Assembly. What is the source? We, the people of India. The ultimate sanction again lies in we, the people. Nature of polity. What are the characteristics of Indian democracy? We have mentioned here. What are the goals and objectives? This is being given here as justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, also remember, it is also giving the date of enactment, that is 26th day of November 1949. We adopt and enact and give to ourselves. So this preamble or the preamble to our Constitution have a very important value. But remember, legally speaking, the preamble of a legislation, which is usually the statement of objective and reasons, do not play much importance other than telling what it is. So the same question was there with the Indian Constitution also, where we had a question whether the preamble has power or is it enforceable or not. The Supreme Court told in clear terms in various cases that the preamble does not have any power. It is sole purposes for interpretation of the Constitution. Now, a major question came, unless and until a particular part or a particular instrument is part of a document, it cannot be termed to have an interpretive value also. So this question, whether the preamble is a part of the Constitution or not, came first in the case of In re Beruberi in the year 1960, wherein the Supreme Court initially told that the preamble is not the part of the Indian Constitution. It told that preamble is there. It can remain outside the Constitution. It is only a document which we may refer. But in the famous basic structure case of Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, the Supreme Court told that preamble is indeed the part of the Constitution because it gives us the founding principles of our Constitution. So these two cases are of much importance when it comes to preamble. And kindly remember this case, these two cases have value. Sorry, just a minute. These two cases, kindly remember, Keshavananda Bharati told that it is part, In re Beruberi told that it is not the part of the Constitution. Just let me clear everything. Yes. Okay. Okay, now moving ahead. After the preamble, for our major examination purpose, next more part comes as the part 3, or what we term as fundamental rights. Now, when we talk about fundamental rights, we also need to, in the introduction part, we need to have an introduction to fundamental duties and directive principles of state policy. Remember that fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy were originally part of the original Constitution, and fundamental duties was introduced via a constitutional amendment. Now, fundamental rights and directive principle of state policy are two sides of the same coin. That is, the two sides of the concept called as rights. The difference is one is enforceable and one is non-enforceable, or rather ideals towards enforcement. When you look directive principles of state policy and fundamental rights, one major importance that comes to our mind is just a minute. Yes. In fundamental rights, we deal with socio-political rights. And when it comes to directive principles of state policy, we deal with socio-economic rights. Now, there was a specific reason why socio-economic rights were put in directive principles of state policy. All those directive principles of state policies, which are mentioned from Article 36 onwards, 37 to be specific, because 38 to be specific, because 36 is a definition clause, 37 is a purposive clause, 38 onwards mentions those rights which the government should try to aspire for while governing the country. Now, due to the limitations in terms of economic resources at the time of independence, the Constituent Assembly members decided to put the socio-economic rights as aspirations so that the government could ensure them at a future date and not remove them from the picture itself. So they put them as aspirations. So that's why right to education, social welfare, labor legislations, equal pay, multiple economic rights were being protected in directive principles of state policy. And all the socio-political rights, right to equality, freedom of speech and expression, rights when it comes to your criminal trials, etc., was being protected as part of your fundamental rights. Sorry. Okay. Now, remember what we did is we modeled our part 3 or the fundamental rights based on Bill of Rights, which were the series of amendments made to the US Constitution. But what we did is we have modified those rights for our Indian context. That is, we never in US, remember, all rights are absolute. But in our constitution, none of the rights are absolute. We have given limitations, reasonable restrictions, etc. Also, we have classified them into positive rights and negative rights. Can anyone tell me examples of positive rights and negative rights in Indian Constitution? What are the positive fundamental rights and what are the negative fundamental rights? Anyone? No one? Positive rights are rights which are guaranteed directly to the citizen. Negative rights are those rights which are given indirectly to citizens, rather which imposes restrictions to the state. When we see Article 14, the state shall ensure to every person equality before law or equal protection of law. Just a minute, one second. Article 21, the state shall not deny to any person no person shall be deprived of his life and personal liberty except procedure established by law. Now, these rights are negative rights. One of the positive rights which exists is Article 19. Every citizen shall have the right, the freedom to. It is vesting directly. The subject matter of right is the citizens directly. In all other majority of the fundamental rights, we have followed the negative rule. Then again, remember, there are rights, fundamental rights, which we have divided between citizens and persons. Article 14, every person. Article 21, person. Article 15 and 16, citizen. Yes, just I will complete this and I will answer your question. Article 19, it is only available to persons. So there was a question whether the preamble is part of the Constitution or not. Yes, preamble is very much part of the Constitution. Okay. Now, let me clear all the drawings. Fine.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, according to my little knowledge, all the fundamental rights have been directly given to all the citizens in our country. Then how can we say that a particular fundamental right is a particular right in a part from a part 3 is indirectly given to the citizen?
I will, sir, when you read, sir, that's what. When you read the provisions, remember that there is a small difference. Yes, the effect of all fundamental rights is that the fundamental rights are being given to the citizens. But when we, or persons or citizens, as the case may be. But when you see the wording specifically, there are rights which impose restriction on the state. And then there are rights which gives direct rights to the citizen. Article 14, the state shall not deny to any person equality before law and equal protection of law. Yes, the end result is that citizens should have right to equality. But when you see the wordings, the duty is being cast upon the state. But unlike Article 19, when you read, every citizen shall have the freedom of A, freedom of speech and expression, B, freedom to form association, movement, all those freedoms. Those our rights are directly being vested to the citizen, and those rights are being given a perimeter or a restriction. To what extent can you exercise that right is being told in 19.2, 19.3, 19.4. So indirectly, or if you take the effect test, we will be studying that under Article 19. Effect test, if you take, or the effect of every fundamental right is that it is being guaranteed to citizens or persons. But when you apply it jurisprudentially, certain rights are being applied directly to the citizens, and certain rights are restriction to the government. I hope it is clear.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So now, part 3, remember, it contains provisions or 28 articles, starts from Article 12 to Article 35. Now, when we talk about this, the 28 provisions, kindly remember that it is divided into 8 major headings. And when we see, we can see that there are effectively 6 categories of fundamental rights. Now, we will see all the headings properly once, then it will be easier also. Now, article, when we group those 28 provisions, we have to group first Article 12 and 13 together. Now, remember, 12 and 13 is a kind of procedural or introductory provisions, which tells how the fundamental rights should be applied. Article 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. This set of articles deals with right to equality. Second set is right to freedom, that comes from Article 19 to 22. Then the next grouping is, so this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. Okay. Next grouping is Article 23 and 24, right against exploitation. Right to freedom of religion is group 4. Group 5 is cultural and educational rights. Now, group 6 only deals with right to constitutional remedy and Article 32. Now, Article 31A, 31B, 31C, 33, 34, 35 are certain procedural provisions which are there, which tells to what extent fundamental rights exist, to what extent it does not apply, what all cases it may apply, etc. So exemption for the military, for if it is for a specific purpose, whether this fundamental rights will be attracted or not, those provisions are there that we'll be dealing in detail the next day. So these restrictions are being told in these provisions. So remember, part 3 contains 6 categories of fundamental rights: right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural and educational right, and right to constitutional remedies. Now, just a minute, clear all my drawings. Why is it? Okay. Now, Article 12. Now, remember, Article 12 is a provision which explains to us what does the word state mean. The word state includes the government and Parliament of India, the government and legislature of each states, all local authorities and other authorities within the territory of India or under the control of Government of India. Remember, Article 12 clearly states 6 categories of entities which can come under the term state. First is Government of India. Second is Parliament of India. Third is Government of the state. Fourth is legislature of the state. Local authorities, that is the fifth category. And sixth category is other authorities. Now, the first 5 categories are self-explanatory. That is the union executive, union legislature, state executive, state legislature, and local bodies. Now, your local bodies include your Panchayati Raj system, entity, bodies, everything. Now, the term other authorities is something which has gotten a lot of judicial interpretation, and we have to see the scope of that particular term. For this particular purpose, remember for Article 12, these are the major case laws which may come for the questions for in form of multiple choice, etc. Now, kindly remember, these cases are not being arranged chronologically. I have collected it and kept it. Now, remember the first case which you have to remember, I think I have missed that one case, is State of Madras versus Shantabai. It is a Madras High Court judgment. Kindly remember, I am just repeating it. State of Madras versus Shantabai. In this particular case, the Supreme Court, the Madras High Court applied the rule of ejusdem generis. The rule of ejusdem generis, that is, the common gene will be looked into to check whether a specific entity will come under that gene or not. It's like telling cabbage, carrot, and other food item. So in that particular thing, whether mango will come or not. The common gene is vegetables. It is not fruits. So it will not be applicable. So in State of Madras versus Shantabai, by the rule was of ejusdem generis. Then we have the case of, just a minute. Citation, sir, I will give it to you. I will do the necessary. I will add that case to this PPT, and then I will send you the citation also. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. I think the citation has been sent across. Okay. Now, Rajasthan. Now, in Rajasthan State Electricity Board, this rule was being rejected, and just a minute. This particular rule was being rejected, and the rule of sovereignty was brought in. This was by a 5 judges bench. Again, in Sukhdev versus Bhagat Ram, we had a similar question of just give me 1 minute, sir. Just 1 minute. In Sukhdev versus Bhagat Ram, remember the same rule of sovereignty has laid down in Rajasthan State Electricity Board was laid down, was accepted, but a obiter dictum was given by Justice K.K. Mathew in Sukhdev versus Bhagat Ram, which has recognized or applied the rule of instrumentality of state. Remember, in Sukhdev versus Bhagat Ram, the obiter of Justice K.K. Mathew laid down the foundation for instrumentality of state. Now, till Rajasthan Electricity Board, or to that extent, Sukhdev case, if an entity is having sovereign powers, that is the powers to make rules and regulations and enforce it against the detriment of others. So entities like ONGC, they can make rules and regulations. If oil is found in someone's land, it can instruct its officials to go and survey that particular land. And if people are not cooperating, case can be taken against the citizens. So that is enforcement and making and enforcing the rules against detriment of the citizen. Now, in this particular situation, the court told that that will not be only the condition to decide whether an entity is other authorities or not. They went ahead and told that the rule of instrumentality will be looked into. That is, if they perform functions of the state, if state is funding the authority, if there is a monopoly that is being granted by the state or state is protecting the monopoly status, if an entire department is converted to a state, into a particular entity, in all those situations, it will be termed as instrumentality. Now, this was an obiter, an observation in Sukhdev versus Bhagat Ram, but it became the rule in R.D. Shetty, Ramanan D. Shetty versus International Airport Authority, wherein the Supreme Court laid down in clear terms the conditions for instrumentality of state. Now, the next two cases has very important role because they looked into Sabji Tiwari versus Union of India and Som Prakash Rekhi versus Union of India. Now, remember, till R.D. Shetty's case, they were statutory entities which were being looked into. In Sabji Tiwari versus Union of India and Som Prakash Rekhi versus Union of India, a society registered under Societies Act and a company, a private company, their validity, whether they are a state or not, was being checked into. Now, in Ajay Hasya versus Khalid Mujib, remember the Supreme Court in clear-cut terms laid down that it does not matter how an entity is created. What matters is whether they fulfill those functionality, public function test, you have your finances test, monopoly test. The sixth test was laid down in Ajay Hasya's case. Now, remember in Ajay Hasya's case and Som Prakash Rekhi's case, on a similar, in 2 days' time difference, one told that any entities can become other authorities, but Som Prakash Rekhi told that only governmental entities can become other authorities. So this was brought in Pradeep Kumar Biswas. Now remember, Pradeep Kumar Biswas is the law of the land right now. If the test for determining other authorities is if an authority, if an entity, it may be a society, it may be a company, it may be a association, it could be a limited liability partnership, any entity. If it is functionally, administratively, and financially under the control of Government of India or government of a state, then it will be termed as other authorities. So you have metro right now being created in form of JV, joint venture partnership, wherein a new company will be floated with government having 51% of share in it. And the majority of the decisions will be decided by the government. Financial support will be given by the government. The revenue from the entity may be shared between the two by the government and the private party. In all the situation, the government plays a major, deep, persuasive control is there. So remember, the current law is Pradeep Kumar Biswas versus Indian Institute of Chemical Biology, where it was told functionally, administratively, and financially, if it is under the control of Government of India, then it will be applicable, or it is other authorities. Now I am skipping to one case and coming to C Telefilms. C Telefilms was the famous case of BCCI, the Cricket Authority in India. Now, the Board of Cricket Control of India, Board of Control of Cricket of India, BCCI, there was a huge question as to when BCCI had given the telecasting rights. C Telefilms, the C channel had went and challenged it. So their argument was that BCCI is a state, it needs to follow equality. It cannot give arbitrarily to anyone. So the Supreme Court told that BCCI is not a state. It is not bound under Part 3 of the Constitution. So, because they applied the Pradeep Kumar Biswas case rule. Remember, BCCI is a private trust created under the Madras Registration Societies Registration Act. The central government does not give any fund. It does not take into, or its decisions are not being decided by the central government. So due to all these reasons, BCCI was held not to be a other authorities under Article 12, and thereby, remember, if you are not coming under the definition of other authorities under Article 12, then you are not bound by fundamental rights. Now, other cases which I have given are pertaining to question as to whether judiciary is a state or not. In all of these cases, the Supreme Court has clearly told that judiciary is not a state for the purpose of Article 12. In other terms, judiciary cannot violate fundamental rights. Fundamental rights can only be violated through executive order or a legislation and never a judicial order. That is what the essence of these other cases exist. Okay. Now, just let me go ahead. Yes. Now, under Article 13, laws inconsistent with or in derogation of fundamental rights. Now, when we talk about Article 13, remember, Article 13 gives us three major doctrines. That is, first one is doctrine of severability, second is doctrine of eclipse, and third is waiver of fundamental rights. Now, doctrine of severability in simple terms is that if when you are challenging something, telling that if the a particular legislation, you are challenging the validity of a particular legislation, then you need not strike down the entire legislation. You can just declare that part which is in violation to the Constitution. So if, let's say, let's say, for example, let's assume the Indian Contract Act. We are declaring section 25, that is agreements for past considerations, etc. If only section 25 is being declared is only violating any of the provisions of the Constitution, only section 25 needs to be struck down. It need not go, the court need not strike down the entire legislation. But assume that the definition clause itself is being struck down, then, or any provision that is the foundation provision for the entire legislation, then the entire legislation will be struck down. Example is the National Tax Tribunal Act. We had it from the Madras High Court itself, a judgment, R. Gandhi versus Union of India, wherein the validity of the National Tax Tribunal was being challenged. And in the said judgment, the composition of the National Tax Tribunal was being struck down. If the tribunal itself, the composition, if we do not know who are the members of the tribunal, we cannot have the provisions of the other provisions of the Tribunal Act to have validity. So in such terms, it was struck, the entire legislation was being struck down. Now remember, this doctrine of severability was laid down in the case of RMDC versus Union of India, AIR 1957, Supreme Court 628. Now Nandi Palkhiwala had argued this case. You could read more about it in, you will get material on this particular case. They lay down what are the conditions on which severability can be applied and not being applied. If it goes to the core, if the provision is intertangled, if one is struck down, can the other survive or not? It's like a tree. If the main branch is having some issue, sometimes the entire tree has to be cut down. But only if the side branches, if the main stem is having a rotting, the entire tree may have to be struck down. Or if the root is having an issue, the entire tree may have to be removed. But only if there are only side branch which require some issue, you could just cut that particular provision only. Okay. Now, next is doctrine of eclipse. Now, doctrine of eclipse, remember, is a provision that is applicable only to pre-constitutional law. That is, any law that has been in force before the Constitution of India came into existence. Indian Penal Code, your CPC, Indian Contract Act, all the legislations which existed before 26th January 1950. Now, with respect to these legislations, there is one provision which tells that, or a doctrine that eclipses, after the Constitution has come into existence, if that part of the legislation which is in violation of the fundamental right is being amended, then the legislation is set to revive. Now, for this, I will just draw one image, then it will be easier. So in this image, it's like this. Assume that this is this line here is just a minute. Where did it go? This line here is 26th January 1950, when the Constitution came into power. And assume that in Indian Penal Code, a particular provision, let's say seditious speech, which is right now being looked, assume that it was struck down for telling that it is too vague on a particular date. Then from 26th January 1950, the said provision is said to go into a suspended animation or told to have no force of law. But subsequently, assume that the Parliament amends it and tells that, or the wordings goes to tell that, whoever in express terms incite violence against the state and which does not include criticism of the government would deem to have committed sedition. That was being amended on, let's say, on 1st January 2021. So from 26th January 1950 to 1st January 2021, the said provision is said to be in suspended animation. It does not have force of law, but without enacting a new law, the act is said to have revived. So here it is having validity, and here it has validity. But during that said period, it does not have validity. This is the doctrine of eclipse, and this was being laid down in the case of Bikaji Narayan Dakras versus state of Uttar Pradesh, state of Madhya Pradesh. Then also you could write down another case, that is Deep Chand versus state of Uttar Pradesh also. Deep, D-E-E-P, Chand, C-H-A-N-D versus state of Uttar Pradesh. Okay. Yeah, all right. Now, the last.
Sir, can you explain Deep Chand and state of Madhya Pradesh?
Deep Chand or Bikaji Narayan? Sir, you want Deep Chand's explanation or Bikaji Narayan's explanation?
Deep Chand.
Deep Chand told the same thing, but only one thing why it is relevant is it specifically told that it is not applicable to post-constitutional law. In Deep Chand versus state of Uttar Pradesh, the same doctrine of eclipse was laid down, which was same as Bikaji Narayan Dakras versus state of Madhya Pradesh. But the only difference in Deep Chand and Bikaji Narayan is that in Deep Chand, it was specifically told that it will not be applicable to post-constitutional law. That is, if a law is being made after the constitution has come into existence, if it is declared unconstitutional, if it has to be revived, you have to pass a new law. The old law will not have any force of law. It is termed to be a stillborn legislation. So that's why if an entire legislation is struck down, the parliament will not pass Amendment Act to revive it. It will have to pass a new legislation altogether to bring back that legislation. Is it clear?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Wonderful.
Okay, not an issue. Now, next is waiver of fundamental rights. Now, for waiver of fundamental rights, the basic principle remains same, and all these 4 cases told the same thing. In US, if I as a citizen tell that I do not want my fundamental right, the state will tell, okay, you do not have fundamental right and you cannot enforce that fundamental right which you have waived. But in India, Supreme Court in clear-cut terms told that as Indian citizen cannot waive his fundamental rights. In other terms, it is a matter of public policy. The state being guaranteed to every citizen or every person. It cannot tell that since the citizen told that he or she does not want fundamental right, we are not liable to give them fundamental rights. Nothing doing. Fundamental rights exist. It is a duty upon state to ensure those fundamental rights. This is being told specifically in the case of Basheshwar Nath versus Income Tax Commissioner, but it gained traction, or the most popular cases, Olga Tellis versus Bombay Municipal Corporation, which is also known as the right to livelihood case or the pavement dweller case, where people were being evicted out of the street hawkers, were being evicted out of the streets and everything. They told, please extend it. We will not go to the court telling that you have violated any of our rights. But later on, they went, then Bombay Municipal Corporation told, they told this, they cannot raise this argument. The court told nothing doing. Remember, you have a duty to enforce fundamental rights. You have to enforce it with respect to everyone. Okay. Then, so that is waiver of fundamental rights. Just 1 minute. Yes. Now, coming to the first category of fundamental rights, that is Article 14 to 18. That is your right to equality. Just give me 1 minute. I will be just coming. Sorry. Now, when we talk about right to equality, if we understand this relation, it will be easier for you to remember the connection, understand the connection also, and remember the connection. Right to equality, the provisions have been put in a place to ensure that the purpose of equality or scheme of equality is better understood with the Indian context. Article 18 prohibits all forms of titles. Now, titles were directly or indirectly connected with the caste system. That's why the moment you abolish titles, the next must be abolishment of the untouchability. That is Article 17. Now remember, the practice of untouchability was prevalent or was there due to the different nature of employment that has been given to different caste. So Article 16 comes into picture, that is, which prohibits discrimination based on caste, gender, and other schemes. When caste discrimination based on caste is being removed, all the other aspects such as restriction on entry to certain public wells or public lakes, ponds, drinking water, etc., due to the caste was being reduced or removed through Article 15. And finally, all aspects of equality is being dealt under Article 14. Now, this is the scheme which the Constituent Assembly intended to have, but when the rules were being applied, interpreted by the court, etc., the biggest issue was that at times this interconnection was forgotten and each provision was being treated independently. Now, coming to Article 14. The state shall not deny to any person equality before law and equal protection of laws. Now, whenever we talk about equality before law or Article 14, that is right to equality, remember, right to equality consists of two parts. First part is equality before law, and second one is equal protection of laws. When we see that term equality before law and equal protection from laws, the word law and laws itself helps in identifying to what all it is applicable. Equality before law, remember, is an abstract concept. In simple terms, remember, it embodies protection against arbitrariness or vagueness. I will come regarding Bharat Ratna and Padma Bhushan. There is a case also, I will be discussing that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, equality before law, remember, is dealing with abstract concept termed as vagueness or right, protection against vagueness and protection against arbitrariness. Now, how can you define arbitrariness? It's difficult. We can define arbitrariness from case to case basis. But when you talk about equal protection of laws, it is more specific and applicable to legislations or embodies a US concept of equality. That is, equals should be treated equally and unequals should not be treated equally. In equality before law under Article 14, remember, it is the UK concept and it deals against arbitrariness. Now, out of these major case laws, we have to remember State of West Bengal versus Anwar Ali Sarkar, Chiranjit Lal versus Union of India, R.K. Garg versus Union of India. These three major case laws we have to remember. Okay. First, we will take State of West Bengal versus Anwar Ali Sarkar. Remember, in State of West Bengal versus Anwar Ali Sarkar, Supreme Court laid down the condition for application of equal protection of laws. When we tell equals should be treated equally and unequals should not be treated equally, it implies that there should be classification or reasonable classification. What do you mean by reasonable classification? Reasonable classification happens when it is based on an intelligible differentiation or intelligible differentia, and there is a reasonable nexus or a reasonable connection with the intelligible differentia and object of the act. So always the classical example of Indian Contract Act, where it talks about who can enter into a contract. Who can enter into a contract? A major person who is of sound mind and who is under, sorry,
who attain the age of majority.
correct, who is a major. So then remember, there is a classification into, by that particular legislation, of the entire Indian population into those who are minor, below 18, and whoever is 18 and above. So through that classification, what is the purpose of classification? Purpose of classification is that a person who enters into the contract understands the consequences of those contracts. So in simple terms, there is a, what do you say, connection between the purpose of the legislation and the classification. So that is intelligible classification, reasonable classification. Now a question came, can a single person or a single entity be considered as a class in himself? That was decided in the case in Chiranjit Lal Chaudhary versus Union of India. Supreme Court told that in special circumstances and conditions unique to them, a single person or a single individual can be considered as a class by himself. Single class legislation. Okay. Now, this was talking about, you must have seen legislations which deals with only one particular company, or RBI taking control of Yes Bank and not any other bank. Why so? It is, Yes Bank had certain conditions which were applicable solely to it. So single class legislation was told valid, subject to the condition that there are unique circumstances and conditions peculiar to that particular case. Now, R.K. Garg versus Union of India, remember, here they tried to bring in morality as a ground to invalidate a legislation. This was one of the first of the demonetization that had happened in India, or money or measures against black money. So what they did is they brought in something known as a special bearer bond. Whoever has black money can buy that bond worth 10,000, 20,000, whatever amount. And after 10 years, they will get back that money with 5% interest. And while buying this bond, income tax authority will not question you, how did you get the money or anything. It was a kind of amnesty scheme, a chance of people to convert all their black money into white money, and government getting some fund for developmental activities. So people went and challenged it, telling that people who are paying Income Tax Act and people who did not pay Income Tax Act properly, there is a classification. It is immoral. What was the argument? The Supreme Court told, nothing doing, sorry, we will not look into the matter. Okay. So this was dealing with R.K. Garg's case. Okay. Now, just let me clear the drawings. Yes. And take the mouse. Then, just a minute. Now, whenever we talk about 14, our right to equality, we have to refer to the series of cases for Article 15 and 16, which, sorry, this is a typographical error. This is the second slide is Article 16. This was my mistake. I will rectify that and send it across. Now, Article 15 and Article 16 are two provisions which has attracted a lot of political discussion also in our area, because Article 15 clause 4 and 16 clause 4 are two provisions which provide for reservation in India. So all those cases starts with M.R. Balaji versus State of Mysore. This I will be taking in the next class because this will require some time. So I am skipping 15 and 16 right now. I will take it up in the next class. I'm going to article 17 and 18. 17 abolishes untouchability. Now remember, untouchability has been abolished through the Civil Rights Act of 1955, which was previously known as Protection of SC/ST Act. Now it is being termed as Civil Rights Act of 1955. Now, Article 18. Now, I had also received a question on the chat regarding what about Bharat Ratna and Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan and all. This was discussed in a case called as Balaji Raghavan versus Union of India. Supreme Court has categorically told that Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan, Bharat Ratna, all of them are awards and not titles, and they should not be used as prefix or suffix to the name. If anyone is found using them as prefix or suffix to their name, they are liable to lose that particular award also. Remember, this is the position of law which was told in Balaji Raghavan versus Union of India, where the court told that Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan, Bharat Ratna and all other such titles are not titles in actuality, but they are awards. Now remember, Article 18 permits for academic and military titles. Colonel, Major, Major General, Field Marshal, all of them are permitted because they are military titles. Secondly, academic titles such as doctor, those are being permitted. So those are permitted, but any other titles in India is prohibited. Okay, so that is Article 17 and 18. I think I will stop here. Take up any questions if you have. It is wrong if they use it. It is wrong. People can go complain. It is wrong usage. So if any doubts are there pertaining to this portions, I can.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, while studying for the judicial service examination, I came across one judgment which says one question actually, which says even a foreign citizen upon visiting the India for a tourist is entitled to get protection under under Article 21 of the Constitution. So in what way Article 21 the right under Article 21 has been given to the foreign person.
Yes, I will just take you back to the introduction part, then it will be easier. Sir, if you do remember, I had told initially that rights are being distinguished, fundamental rights are being distinguished, just a minute, between citizens and persons. Now, remember, the term persons will include enemy alien, foreigner, company, any entity which has personality. Article 21 says the state shall not deny to any person. It is not telling any citizen. Now, if I'm not wrong, the case which that particular, if the options, if it is there, it must be one case called Francis Mulanis versus State of Delhi. So a foreigner was being arrested and imprisoned for certain crime in Delhi prison. He wanted access to the library. So at that point of time, when he filed a petition, the court told that even a prisoner, even a foreign citizen who is in India is entitled to fundamental rights, provided that that fundamental rights is being provided to persons. Article 19, remember, a foreign journalist cannot claim coming to India that he has a freedom of speech and expression, because freedom of speech and expression is being guaranteed only to citizens and not to persons. Okay, is that clear, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Waiver of fundamental rights. Waiver of fundamental rights, sir, in simple terms means, sir, if you are telling, I do not want right to equality, the state cannot take up a defense before the court telling that for everyone I have assured right to equality, but since X has told that he does not want right to equality, I can violate his fundamental right to equality. Such a position of law is not permitted in India. So remember, waiver of rights is not, fundamental rights is not permitted in India.
Any case law, sir, important case law in this aspect?
For that only, sir, I have told. Basheshwar Nath versus IT Commissioner, Olga Tillis versus Bombay Municipal Corporation, Behram versus State of Maharashtra, Narsingh Pal versus Union of India. These
Okay,
four
sir.
case laws are telling the same thing, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Any other doubts?
Sir, will you give some facts about fact examples?
Sorry?
So
Sorry,
give some fact about facts, sir. This case fact waiver of fundamental rights. Will you give some facts?
Basheshwar Nath,
understand.
sir. Basheshwar Nath, what had happened was very simple, sir. In Basheshwar Nath versus IT Commissioner, Basheshwar Nath and IT Commissioner had come into for an out-of-court settlement as per one provision of the IT Act. That is your Income Tax Act. But that provision was struck down by the Supreme Court on a subsequent date. So Basheshwar Nath told that since that provision is struck down, I need not pay the IT department any amount. IT department went to the court. Basheshwar Nath also went. IT told, sir, they had agreed mutually, irrespective of the fact that whether that he will be paying that amount, but we had to notify that out of court settlement under a particular provision. By agreeing so, he has waived all his rights and told that he is subjecting himself to this particular provision or paying this amount. The court told in simple terms, see, just because he has agreed does not mean that he is waiving his fundamental rights. If that provision is violative of a fundamental right, then he need not pay that amount. So that was told in Basheshwar Nath. Olga Tillis, what happened is on the roadside and there were illegal constructions and there were illegal what do you say, encroachment on governmental land and everything, and people were living and conducting business. So when the Bombay Municipal Corporation came there for taking the possession, initially they told, please extend our dates by another 21 days. And even after 21 days, if you come and try to acquire the property, and if we have not left, we will not go to the court. But on 21st day, when that particular day when the Bombay Municipal Corporation and authorities came, they did not move or they did not evict the land, and they were still continuing with that particular what do you say, living and business. And that point of time when they came for taking the land and everything, they went to the court. Before the court, Bombay Municipal Corporation told, they had told that they will not come to the court. They have waived their right to come to the court for any constitutional remedy. The Bombay High Court and also the Supreme Court told in clear-cut terms, you cannot claim such things. They may have told anything, but you have a duty to ensure that when you are taking away their rights, it is being done in a due process. Okay, that was Olga Tillis' case. Okay.
Yeah, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yes.
Yeah. In Beriberi case, a Supreme Court held that preamble is not a part of Constitution, but
Correct.
later, the case, Supreme Court held the preamble is a part of Constitution.
Yes.
Yes, sir. But in 1995 LIC case, Supreme Court again, Supreme Court held preamble is a part of integral part of Constitution. So what
Correct.
is the difference between Keshavanda Bharati case and LIC case?
It is only re-emphasizing or restating that preamble can be used for interpretation. In Keshavananda Bharati, it was told it is part of the Constitution, but in the LIC case, it was more re-emphasized that we can also use, it is very much part, and we should look the preamble for while interpreting the Constitution. It is only re-emphasizing or telling this is it, and but we go ahead one more step ahead. That's all. In essence, it is the same.
Sir?
In essence, it is same. So one is telling it is part, the other is telling it is a part which should be looked into while interpreting. Now, when we have to define or see the scope of right to equality, under the preamble, it is told equality of, just a minute, justice.
Okay, sir.
So it is more interpretive in nature, that's all.
Sir, but there is no specific article or provision or anything, there is no for preamble, then how it is a part of Constitution, sir?
So see, when we see preamble tells what was the purpose behind the Constitution. It is like interpreting the Constitution, we have to see what were the objectives of laying down the Constitution. For that, we have to go to the preamble. So when you have the interpretation of statutes, we try to look what is the purpose of the statute by looking in its statement of objective and reason. So like that, while interpreting the Constitution, we have to go to the preamble to look into the purpose. Because remember, the Constituent Assembly's mind or the vision of the Constituent Assembly is being told in the preamble, not in the wordings of the Constitution. It is telling, we want to secure all its citizens, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. How it is being done? It is through fundamental rights, the principles of state policy, etc. So that's why preamble becomes a very much integral part for interpretation of the Constitution.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other doubts?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Very kind of you.
Thank you, sir.
I think we may continue the session subsequent days, sir. After the session, I'll discuss with you and I'll let you inform you, sir.
Yes, sir.
It's a very good session. Participant, you just go through what are the case class discussed with this are all very important for any competitive examination. That has really worked well for us. So the election was thank you, sir. It's a very good session for them. Kind of you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. But I will be sharing the PPT in tomorrow or day after to sir. Sir can transfer it to everyone. Share it with everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Excellent lecture, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you and good night, sir.
Good night.